Welcome, Tugce.
Hi, Alice.
How are you?
Alicia, how are you?
Very good. Yeah, we were just talking about how do we pronounce each other's names. Yeah,
perfect. Yeah, it's just the perfect way to start a conversation about, death.
That's right. Yeah. What's your name? Imagine death comes and knocks at the door, and what's your name?
Exactly.
I know. I forgot it. The neighbor.
Yeah. Okay then. Off you go.
Welcome to Alice in Gothic Land. I'm super excited of having you here today. We haven't met long ago. We met like recently. It was maybe not even a month ago. We met.
Exactly. Thanks to technology.
Exactly. We were saying before that this is wonderful that, yes, it's true that on the one hand, we cannot meet physically with people, but on the other hand, I'm meeting tones and getting to know new people. This is great. So, yeah, so we met through, I have to mention Sam Hurst here. So Dr. Sam Hurst.
Of course.
From Romancing the Gothic, thanks to her and one of the sessions she proposed, you proposed to her, then we met. Then I thought, someone who's talking about death. How cool is that? So before, I'm going to start sharing a couple of screens and then we take it from there, and then we'll stop, we'll carry on. But I'm super, super excited. Let's see if we do a good job of this, because I'm a little bit, with technology, sometimes this is
I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful that this is going to turn out very good.
The first screen is not happening. Hang on a minute. Right, there we go. It's taking a little bit of time. Look, I've had to use...
Something is happening. Something is definitely happening, Alice.
Okay, there we go. I've had to steal this from internet. Okay, let me see if it lets me share now, because it's a bit of...
This is so good. This is so good.
Stole that.
Oh my God, I love this. You have to send me this. This is perfect.
I will send you the whole thing. Yes. There you go. Oh, I've disappeared from the screen, and never mind.
Why did you go away, Alice?
Well, I'm the ghost. Obviously, I'm the ghost in the screen. No, my computer, I'm the ghost one.
Obviously, I'm the ghost one.
You must be the Reaper. Look, you just talking.
Exactly. You hid behind the tree there.
Anyway, that's awesome. So, interview with a horror researcher. So every interview I do, I give it a name. I have interviews with authors, with the author and the publisher. I've got some interviews with my sister. I'm kidnapping everybody. So this is an interview with the horror researcher, because you are mainly a researcher, aren't you?
I am.
But you have a lot of other jobs, so I've seen you doing other things as well. So
I am basically right now I'm working for Turkish television, Turkish radio and television, as a kind of like script consultant. So I read scripts and write reports. That's my day job. And then I'm doing MAs, and now I'm starting PhD this autumn. But mainly I'm doing horror research, horror or trauma, grief, something related to that. But I also have a paper on Yorgos Lanthimos, which is a lot of people find this weird because I mainly research horror, but I think his films are nothing short of horror. I mean, have you seen Dogtooth, for example? I mean, to me, that's a horror film.
Right. Yeah. I think the people we like the Gothic and horror because we see that they very connected, intertwined, they're interconnected. We tend to see it everywhere, don't we? Even when we don't necessarily have a horror film per se, we find horror elements and Gothic elements on those. And I think that's one of the things in your research that I'm really kind of attracted to, because you can find these elements and you've been able to spot these elements that other people kind of avoided or just missed completely. So, well, looking again at your videos and everything, I thought, yeah, this the aim of the research is just find out all these niches.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to talk about, death and grief, I think makes people kind of like squeamish, because it's the one thing that we all have in common along with our birth.
Yeah.
We will die
That's
as we were born. So I think people kind of find it discomforting to talk about death so much while we are alive, at least. But like horror films, when I started my research, I looked at previous research, and I've seen that no person talks about grief.
Yeah.
And that was, to me, there was one mention, and that person wrote, "There's no grief in horror," and I was like, what? No, that cannot be true, certainly, because they are about death. And because of that, I think I wanted to talk more about death and grief in horror films, and in general, actually. Yeah. Because this is the one thing that can combine us, make us come together. And this is the one thing that we don't talk about.
That's right.
I think that tells a lot of stories.
No, that's right. That's definitely one of the things I, excuse me, when I met you through Sam, and then your presentation, I thought, with all the presentations that I've been to in different people doing things, nobody really talks about death. And I've been to programs where we talk about the supernatural.
Yeah.
It's true, and the paranormal, but it's true that we might talk about death once the person has passed away.
Yeah.
But not about death itself. And this process of mourning and bereavement and as you said, the grief. So I thought that's very interesting. This is what I find the Gothic, like, very obviously in that moment of the uncanny, where he's there, but it's not. I need to talk about it, but I want to avoid it because it hurts. So that's the kind of thing I thought, yes, she's got something here that I really want to talk about.
Yeah, I think you just said a very important point. It hurts. Yeah. I think it's that simple. That's the reason people don't want to talk about it, because everyone has someone who has passed away.
That's right.
And because of that, they don't want to talk about it. But it was the reason I personally wanted to talk about it, because I lost my grandfather. And when I lost my grandfather, it was like this, it was 10 years ago, and it was a wake-up call for me. Our relationship was mostly him telling us as children horror stories, and we loved it. Wow. And when he passed, those stories were gone. He was the reason I became such a huge horror fan.
Wow.
Because that was a moment that I enjoyed. And after his demise, I started watching horror films after a while. And I realized that in some of these films, the characters were going through what I was going through. And I looked into myself, and I buried myself in books. And I figured out that it was grief, a process that was pushed aside in modern times, as we are talking about it.
Yeah.
And when I looked into other horror films from the 21st century, I saw a similarity. The turn of the millennium brought many things in its stride, but the ones that related to my work are the rise in violent events in the past 20 years, which are a lot, and the surge in public displays of emotion and mourning, such as 9/11 and the funeral of Princess Diana. Those two events are really important for grief and trauma studies, because those were public. Everybody was mourning. I mean, that was everywhere.
That's
you
true.
Couldn't escape it. It was on our televisions, it was on our computers, and finally it was on our smartphones. Wow. So there was nowhere to hide from death and grief.
And it was worldwide. That's the thing, that it was a worldwide.
Yes, exactly. It was a worldwide phenomenon. So everyone was knowingly or unknowingly was in mourning.
Yeah.
They were experiencing grief, even though maybe they couldn't name it, just like I couldn't name it when my grandfather died. Like I was like, what is this? This is not sadness. This is something else. This is like, I have to know what this is about. And I think this events, this public displays of mourning, may have urged contemporary horror filmmakers to create, cinematic kind of like memento mori, a reminder of mortality. It's very important for me. Like, I think I see these films that are about grief as cinematic memento mori. And it is a way to deal with maybe their own grief as people, because directors are people too. So they were using the cinematic medium to deal with their own grief, maybe. And as horror is one of the most culturally relevant genres, and it always manages to keep up with the times. And it is no surprise that the genre horror is once again in the front rows of cultural change, I think. And this time the cultural change is about death.
That's right. That's
it
right.
Has to be.
It has to be.
Yeah.
No, it's super important. That's a great introduction. It's a great introduction to what we're going to be talking about. I'm still missing from it. But never mind. But this is what I'm all about. I'm just going to pitch my PDF here. It's super important what you're saying, Tugce, because we actually, one of my worries and my concerns and how to connect the horror and the Gothic in people's lives is precisely using this connection to, it is fiction, but at the same time it's so close to us. How to use our critical thinking to actually overcome our own fears, not only in communication, but in any area. So I think it's super important what you're saying, because yes, we all have things in common. We all have these fears. So for people who are watching, I have a PDF. I'm sorry, this is like a bit disruptive, but let's throw it there.
It has a really cool poster. I love it.
Yeah, it's just the cover of
the cover art. Yeah, cover art.
Yeah,
I love it.
I love Canva. It's got so many tools, and it's like a little toy for me. So it's basically what we're saying. I have a something here for anybody who would like to see how critical thinking is so important when we communicate, but how to look through your fears to overcome your communication fears through the Gothic lens is such a big thing. And this is what this Alice in Gothic Land is all about, is and when I'm interviewing authors and researchers and publishers, it's just that, to have in mind the critical thinking, and then how do we communicate everything that we're fearing by thinking all the questions, the why, the who's, the when's, the what's, and all these. They're so crucial in horror as well. And then how can do all that to overcome our daily problems. So I think what you just said is so important. And this takes us to this meeting, so people can see this is where I met you. This is, we're not going to play it, but YouTube goes. But this is where people can see the first presentation I was really engaged with when I met you. And it was called Mourning in Horror. Yeah, grief in the 21st century. Yeah. Horror cinema, which is what we're talking about. And this was with a fantastic idea and sessions by Sam Hurst. And her space is called Romancing the Gothic, for anybody who's watching. A little bit of help to Sam, because she does a lot of incredible work. She interviews a lot of people and a lot of fantastic people with a lot of information, and it's free. I mean, it's just donations whenever people can help her out as well. So this was a really enlightening for me, this presentation, because you talk there about things like, I'm just going to get my notes now, because you mentioned a couple of things that I've just taken from there. You talk about the 5 stages of grief there.
Yes. It's really important to my research. And thank God. I mean, were you going to add something? I just jumped.
No, just go. Yeah. It's just that
okay.
A lot of quotes that I will be commenting on. But yeah, this is one of the first points that when you were grief in this presentation, and I recommend everyone to go and watch that, is that there are 5 stages, but then there are other people that might disagree with these 5 stages. And then by looking into some of my notes yesterday, you know, that I had those photocopies that I took years ago that I showed you in our last meeting, and I found those stages again, and then there were other stages. And I thought, I need to ask this because it's kind of confusing, but everybody talks about them. But really, what are these stages? If you can elaborate now.
Of course. Elizabeth Kübler-Ross, may she rest in peace. She wrote a book called On Death and Dying in 1969. I mean, this is very early research on grief. But when she was writing it, she wasn't talking about the people, like talking about the loved ones of the, you know, deceased. She was talking about the people who are, you know, terminally ill. And those were the stages that these people were going through, you know, starting from denial, anger, bargaining, and depression, and finally acceptance. And because, you know, you can grieve your own self. For example, if you were diagnosed with cancer, they told you like you will be dead in 6 months. You would be shocked, and then you would deny it, and then maybe you would get angry, and then you would try to bargain. You were like, maybe 6 months more, maybe this and maybe that, and then you would finally realize, and you would feel depressed, and then you have to accept it at one point that you're going to die. So, but after she wrote the book, she gathered so much attention, and everybody started talking about, you know, oh, these are about the loved ones of the deceased. No, she was like, no, I was writing about the deceased themselves, like before they died. And so people judged her for being too linear, and, you know, those are stages. They kind of didn't understand her point. Right. She wasn't talking about something linear. And in 2005, she wrote another book with David Kessler. This book's name is On Grief and Grieving. And she later explained in this book that these stages are not meant to be set in stone, and they're not linear. It is possible to jump from one stage to another, or not experience any of it, or experience all of it. Like it definitely changes from person to person. And in my research, I talked about, you know, each chapter was about it was about one stage. And chapter 1, for example, was denial. And I was talking about Midsommar, Ari Aster's film. And in the second chapter, anger, I was talking about another Ari Aster film. He's obsessed with death and grief, by the way. I was talking about Hereditary. And in chapter 3, bargaining, I was talking about Pet Sematary, which is basically a dad bargaining with death. I mean, you cannot be more into bargaining than this. And in chapter 4, I talked about The Woman in Black, which was written in 1983, but it's basically a Gothic book. And because it's set in Edwardian era. And in chapter 5, Acceptance, I talked about the Babadook, which I find the most tangible portrayal of grief ever in cinematic history, because, you know, the Babadook, the monster there, is grief. Grief itself.
You know, I have to tell you something about this, because we were watching, you know, we finished a night, we watched something together as a family with my husband, my kids. Well, the kids play games and we watch things. And sometimes my 11-year-old just asked a peep, and, you know, what's that? And we were just like searching, okay, what do you want to watch? I'm like, I don't know. Just give me, you choose tonight. My husband said, you choose tonight, because normally I'm really crap at choosing. So I'm like, no, you do it. I'm lazy. At the end of the day, I've done all the work. Go on, you choose. And so we're there flicking Netflix, and now had the remote. And then obviously I had your voice there somewhere. I've forgotten this, and I Babadook, and I'm like, oh, why do I have to watch this?
I have to watch this film. Someone told me.
Yeah, and it was there, So we watched
Yeah.
it, and at the end we were really disoriented. And I said, "This is rubbish."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "What
What a rubbish film!
is this?
Who recommended this film to me?"
Why did I have to watch this?" That was. But then the thing is that is one of those films that doesn't leave you; it clings to you. And you can think about it. Yes, and as this is true, isn't it? Is this shadow that you don't quite see the face, apart from the book, when you open the book, and then how much pressure, or this is almost like a symbiosis between the protagonists and this thing that is like the personification of fear,
the monster.
But it's all about death. Exactly. And he plays with you. He plays with the woman. And then all of a sudden he's the husband. He's like, oh, there's nothing more creepy than this body snatching.
Exactly. I know. It's a completely disorienting film.
Yeah.
I mean, it is like when you first watch it, you're like, what happened? And then in the second time, I watched it many times, by the way. I watched it many times. And with each watch, I'm realizing something else in the film. Jennifer Kent is a genius. I mean, when you, for example, like in one sequence, you see Oscar's clothes in the basement, and it's the get-up of the Babadook, just like it. And you're like, oh, this is not about fear. This is about something else. We are talking something else here.
Yeah.
Because like from the beginning of the film, we are seeing how much Amelia is bad at handling her grief.
That's right.
How bad at coping, how bad at moving on. Even her sister said so. She's like, you should move on. You have to move on. And she's not a good character, but she wants her sister to kind of like move on from this death. But that is not that easy to just push aside.
That's right. It's like almost like people getting angry because they don't let you grieve. And it's so true what you say. In this is really clear in this film that she's still grieving. She can't move on because it's very present for her. And it's a shock because obviously at the moment he dies is when the son is born. So spoiler. So how
spoiler
alert. So how cruel is that? But how true that could be in some cases. There might have been cases of people in that situation. She might not have just invented this scenario, and it's true. And it made me think, this is really twisted, but the son couldn't be a normal child, define normal, but he couldn't be a normal child because he was born already with his aura. He was
of death.
Exactly. So when you think about it, it's like it's good. And then at the end, this end where normally in an American film you would have got this happy ending, and then you're there with this thing still there, and at some point it might grow back. So it's clever. It's clever, but it's disturbing.
Very clever.
It's disturbing, but
it's very disturbing. But I mean, Kubler-Ross and Kessler talks about the stage of acceptance as kind of learning to live again. And learning to live again, sometimes you might forget what you learned.
Mosquito.
And I think mosquito.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. But sometimes you might forget it might grow back, it might not grow back. But the point there is that grief will never go away. It will never go away. It will never leave you. There'll be just for example, you will forget about the death, and then you will see somebody's sweatshirt, that person's sweatshirt, and you will say, oh, they died.
Yeah.
And that one thing can trigger another grief reaction.
That's
So
true.
you will never know if the monster will grow back. But as we see in the, for me, it's a happy ending, because for the first time, Samuel's birthday, which is also her husband's death day,
That's right.
is celebrated for
Yeah.
the first time ever. And to me, that's a very happy ending, because that shows me that she is accepting it
Yeah, and it's
at last.
it's a balance. I think for the child, if you notice, I think at the end for the kid, this is like some kind of normality. So even his behavior balances out a little bit, because he's a little bit out of skilted as well. Is this kid's behavior until he's frightened himself. So the boogeyman becomes real, and then everything changes around, and then he becomes scared. And but it is this ending, yes, he needed that as well. So that's clever in that sense too.
He needs that. Yeah.
Right.
I know. Yeah, for example, in the end, Samuel has a sentence. He says, "It's getting much better, Mom." And that sentence hits me so hard, because that sentence showed me that this film is about grief, and the monster is grief. Because why else would he say, "It's getting much better, Mom"?
It's true. It's
I
true.
mean,
The words that someone who's mourning would say after a while.
exactly. It's something you would say to a mourner, not not to some monster. You wouldn't say that.
No, absolutely.
So it shows me that that film is entirely about grief, death, dying, and it's so important. It's such an important film, I think. Jennifer Kent,
I'm glad I've watched it now.
as I will once again say,
sorry.
watch it again. Like, you have to watch it again.
Thank you.
And Jennifer Kent is a genius.
No, it's actually I love talking about, you know, a lot of times you find out that films that you say, what's this? Or books that you go, what's this? When you actually talk about them and then you start dismembering this is the critical thinking coming to play now. When we start doing, when actually you go, oh right, that's what I never thought of that, or it didn't quite click in my brain that way at that time.
Yeah.
But now that you're saying it, it's so true. When you just remove the first layer, that would be the logical layer, that the kids got this fear of monsters, like the boogeyman or the monster under your bed, like kids do. But it's something else. It's not just that. It's what they have created as a family. So it's their own monster, because where does the book come from? It's already there in the house. So, and they've never seen that before. So when you start thinking on those lines, it's very clever, and the messages are there all the time. You just need to like find out that that's what it is. But
and you have to pick them apart one by one,
like the book,
starting with the book.
Yeah,
the book is like, it's a pop-up book. You're like, this is the most innocent thing in the history of the world, and you turned it into a monster.
That's right.
Like, that's that I think that's the beauty of filmmaking. And horror is generally looked upon, and it's like it's frowned upon, and it's like it's kind of like the unwanted child of the film scholarship. It's like horror, like they are trash. They're not trash. They're, even the trashy ones are telling a story. I mean, when I was doing the research, I looked at a lot of slasher films. I watched hundreds of films for my research, and slasher, people die and you forget about it, right? But no, it's not. Even in the slasher films, I mean, Friday the 13th, spoiler alert, everyone. Friday the 13th gives us a killer in the form of a grieving mother, and she's trying to avenge her dead son, because her son died because of the camp leaders weren't, they were having sex and they weren't looking after the children, and he drowned. Jason drowned. And she's now trying to take revenge on that. And to me, that's all about grief, all about the dying. And she's basically trying to also, she was also working at the camp, and she herself didn't hear his screams. So she's also having some sort of guilty reaction to all of it, and she's basically reflecting that upon the youngsters and the teenagers and slashing them all together. And if you look at another slasher, Final Destination, one of my favorite franchises. I love Final Destination.
Yeah. Oh, I've forgotten about that. Yeah.
Oh my god. I still have nightmares if I'm driving, a car and there's like blocks of tree coming my way, and I'm still scared of saunas, to be honest, and solariums. Sorry. And this film is all about, there are so many funeral scenes in that franchise. I couldn't keep count, like, because you normally wouldn't see funeral scenes in horror films. People die and that's it. You don't stay for the funeral. But in Final Destination, there are a lot of funeral scenes, and grieving people attack each other and they fight, and they're like, it's your fault, and it's this fault, it's my fault, and a lot of fault blaming, and a lot of things going on in that funeral scenes. And then I looked at Scream, another franchise, and Scream to me is all about Sydney's grief over her mother, because they had a problematic relationship and they couldn't resolve it, and Maureen died, and so Sydney will never be able to resolve it. So she has to live with her complicated grief all her life. And all those 4 films to me are about Sydney's grief, because in the first film, for example, her boyfriend says, get over it, as if it's just something that she couldn't find in the supermarket. Her mother was raped and killed. What are you talking about? Like, get over it. It's been a year. And
it seems to be the period of time as well, doesn't it?
Exactly. It's like, it's been a year. But it's excuse me, sir, it's her mother. Yeah. She could grieve as much as she wants. And then I think in the second film, she's constantly thinking about the people she lost in the first film. And in the third film, she's seeing her mother's ghost, which is very, Gothic, right? Because she's like in white dress, and she's like in the foggy weather. And then in the fourth film, they're calling her the angel of death. I mean, how it's victim blaming. I mean, she's already suffering survivor's guilt. So you don't have to blame her. She's already blaming herself.
This is so much like when you think about real world, isn't it? You've got in funerals, you get people doing these kind of things for the will, for example, people complaining. And I know I have to say there's some in my family. We don't even need to go very far. There's been from one side of my family, there was this kind of, we will call it in Spanish, we used to have this period of time called el esperpento, which was it describes very well the Spanish horror in a way, because it's like we always have this sense of humor. But it is this esperpentic period of time that is not kind of replicated, but we do these things. It's a funeral, and then we start screaming at each other and talking about wills and you did this and you did that, and it becomes comical. That's where the esperpento will come along. But it's so true. You think about it, and it might be like in an exaggerated format. Horror will be like the exaggerated format of reality. So I mean, these things are not invented. These things are taken from people's lives, and it's just been like magnified, if you want, and called horror. But people go camping, people get eaten by animals,
they do.
We experience these things. And so yes, the fact that now horror seems to be getting like a better place, and also the slasher films, like you were saying where we saw in the last 2 weeks where they were doing these sessions on slashers. I've got it here as well, and I'm going to bring it up now that it's come up, so then we don't forget. But we always, this like the lack of quality for horror slashes, the Gothic the same, when actually, yes, you did this lovely presentation in the slasher studies summer camp. And I think that was fantastic. Let's help our friends from this side, this great proposal. I was really happy, it was like really nice. You could choose this. It was this marathon of people talking about horror and films and so much.
And all of them so interesting.
I know. I was really particularly interested in death and just those. And there was a couple of interventions that I thought, yeah, this is really going on where my research is going to, because of the law of death, this kind of theme as well, and the ghostly figures, and it was very clever. And again, so you talked about these here and now in horror, and I thought it was, you find a way around the topic you were dealing here with. You find your way around again to talk about the grief and mourning and this idea of the Groundhog Day. It's fantastic. I love that, because it's true. You can't just watch something and stay on the surface. You have to go in and take a dive and analyze, what is this telling us? How is this close to our everyday lives? What can we learn from this? Because this is a point in my journeys. What is the point in all this that we like so much, that is horror, that is Gothic, that is slasher, that is splatterpunk, whatever? But what do these things have, these genres, subgenres, what do they all have that we can learn from, take it out of the fiction context and use it in our everyday lives? What do we learn from all these things? That's, for me, is like the key.
Yeah, I mean, I think before that, I want to talk a little bit about how death, our relation to death, is very personal and cultural. I think because that's the main point. That's the thing that we have to change.
True.
And in the beginning, I said that my grief over my grandfather and our relationship pushed me to investigate grief. Mm-hmm. So even my scholarly interest was personal. And because that is a very intimate thing, but it's also universal. As I said, it's the one thing along with birth that we will surely experience. I mean, no one, if there are vampires out there, hello to you. But apart from that, if you're not immortal, you will experience it.
Yeah, but the custom, even the vampire, think about it, they had to die first before.
Yeah, they have to die first.
So death.
You know a couple of vampires, don't you?
Oh yes, I do love them. I wouldn't like them to buy me, and I would like to be one myself. But yeah, kind of like Vampire Diaries, this kind of thing. No, I love True Blood, for example. I loved it.
True Blood. Yeah, definitely. There are deaths in that too. But the customs change from country to country. That's why I limited my research to Anglo-American world, because you see Asian cultures are more relaxed around death. They give comfort to the bereaved. I am from Turkey myself, and I know for a fact that death and grief are taken seriously around here. You don't leave the family alone for at least 1 week. And you share the load of mourning, which is a lot, actually. And you see a similar experience in Jewish culture and Muslim culture as well. And you don't even leave the dead alone for a night. It's called a vigil. And there's a wonderful film, by the way, called The Vigil, and I recommend everybody to watch it. It's beautiful. It's a horror film, of course. And however, when you look over to Christianity, especially Anglo-American cultures, you see a sort of loneliness, isolation, a need to keep death as far away as possible. But because of this, the mourner feels alone in the world. Suicide commonly accompanies a loved one's death in this case. So death discomfort causes more deaths, actually. And death, along with the talk of grief, is pushed away. Death is seen as something that concerns funeral homes. And I think Kerrigan says this beautifully, and I will quote this. he says, by the beginning of the 20th century, the transformation was more or less complete. No normal family would even think of taking such responsibilities itself. The presence of death would contaminate the family house. It was felt, so the body would instead rest in the funeral home until, having been rendered pristine by the embalmers, it was ready to be laid in earth. I think he says this beautifully. You're like, oh my God, I never thought about this like this before. They are keeping death in the funeral homes. They are keeping it out of the family house.
Yeah.
But it's not the same in my culture. We do everything by ourselves. We wash the dead. We take vigils to protect the dead. We do a lot of things ourselves. Absolutely. Not give it to someone else. It's a very different culture. So I think, that is visceral. I know. Yes, it is. You don't want to talk about it. You don't want to think about it. But it's also familiar. We need to be able to talk more about death and grief. That's the only way to move forward. And I think horror films about grief are trying to open up that hard but much needed conversation, because people are, we have come to the point in the 21st century, especially after that public displays of mourning, we've come to realize that this is not the way to go. We cannot push this aside. We cannot push this back anymore. It's coming up. Yeah. And we are now opening up the television, and there's war in Afghanistan. There's war here. There's war there. And people are dying. And you can't shut this off. You can't. If one person is dying somewhere else, you are feeling it, because we are connected in that sense, I think.
No, it's true. That's why maybe a lot of people, and I include myself in that group of people, you just can only put up with so much, because you would like to help everybody, and you feel like you just don't have the means. And in the end, you just have to look after people near you and just make sure that at least you do your job nearby with the people closer, the people you can reach. But it's true that when you think about it, I mean, we talked about it this last time and the previous time as well, that the way of dealing with death after the person is dead, the person has died, and how the family still have this contact. I mean, I wouldn't have even dreamt of touching my grandparents when they died, because even just we create these things, the morning we put them behind this glass wall, and they're there, and you can see the display. Some places they put this glass wall. In other places you just have the room and the corpse there in the coffin, and it's like you feel bad because you like breaking or getting into the intimacy of the dead body, because they display there like you were, like in a window shop, and then this person is not there anymore, because the body just looks like it's not even that person. It's not that person anymore. Not that person anymore. Where is he or where is she? And at the same time, you feel like you're abandoning this person there. I mean, the feelings are so varied. And a lot of times when my grandma, when she died, my last grandparent, when she died, I was pregnant with my first child. And everybody was like, even my mom, well, maybe you shouldn't see her. And I didn't know what was best, because I thought, well, my other grandparents, I didn't see them. And then I'm now wondering, but is this morbid because I want to see what death looks like on my grandparents?
It's morbid curiosity.
But then you don't. It's like, am I going to be, my family are going to think that I'm a weirdo, that, there's so much going on there, and nobody seems talking about it. Nobody talks about it, and it's kind of horrible. And then my mother was telling me not long ago as well about in the villages in the past, when she was little, death was more in the homes than it is now. So we're talking about maybe 50, 60 years ago, things were different. Now we have moved the dead a lot in the ways that you were saying, in the terms that you were saying.
Yeah,
You put them
thank you
there
very
and
much.
get rid of them quickly as well, and then bury them, bye-bye, see you later, until the 1st of November that we put some candles and flowers. But yeah, that's what we do. We push them away. But my mom was saying the other day that she remembers going to this home as a child, and there were all these ladies crying, and she didn't know what was going on because she was a child. And then in the middle of the living room, there was this little box with a child inside. And she thought, I mean, she's now 73, 74, and that image is never left her. It's been haunting her forever. So as a parent, you don't want that for your children. You don't want that trauma. But at the same time, just like, what a beautiful box. Why is he sleeping in that box? The innocence of the child. So is it good to actually have that contact, or is that too much, for the child's perception as well? People don't talk about these things. And when there's a death of a child, like we were saying once, it's even worse, it's even more painful. So
it is. I mean, I remember that the first person that died was my father's mother that I saw. I was like 10 years old, and they told me, I wasn't in much contact with her, but they told me that, oh, by the way, she went to a better place, and they tried to explain that to me, that what, you will never see her again, but maybe in another life. And I remember I just continued with my play. I didn't get what they were talking about. And then when we went to visit her in the graveyard, we were walking by a lot of graves, and in Muslim culture, the graves are the size of the body, basically. And I saw a little grave, and I said that, oh, what is that? Why is that so small? And they were like, they looked at one another, and they said, oh, it's a baby, it's 6 months old baby. And I was like, I remember that was the time, not my grandmother's passing, but that was the thing that shocked me. And I was like, are we able to, because my grandmother was 85, I was like, are we supposed to die this young? Like, what do you mean? And that was the moment that I realized death exists for all of us, like not for old people, but all of us. And I think a lot of people, and my grandfather, my grandfather, the one that I talked about in the beginning, when he died, I was like 22, so pretty old to understand that and what's going on. And my mother and her sister, they were kissing his face. He was dead, by the way. They were crying over him, and it was in the house, of course. And they were like, do you want to say your goodbyes? And I remember touching his arm, and I realized it was stone cold. It was the coldest thing I've ever touched. And I did this, and I said, no, he's not there. And yeah, he's not there. And I walked away. And that was, after that, of course, I started having grief reactions, and I started, turning to books, and I'm like, what is this about? Why am I having? And now I am thinking, maybe if I said my goodbyes, maybe I wouldn't be here and talking about grief at all, because I would be saying my goodbyes.
But you don't know. It's what you said before.
Maybe. You never know. Yes.
You can never let go. I had miscarriages, as you know, that I told you in the past. And I know. They were not advanced, only a few weeks, but they were still in my head. These kids were adults at some point in that show process of knowing, from the moment you're pregnant until it's not going to go on. You do a lot, and your brain does a lot. But you don't, sometimes you think, well, that's it, the period's gone, I've had my other child. But one person doesn't remove another person. And not seeing it there, or not seeing, because when you miscarry, you don't even have time for clothing or anything. But in my head, I already had my first son's clothes ready for the second one. So I already had clothes, and I had a cot, and I had everything. And for me, what was kind of worse was this season, the passing of seasons. Imagine more than, as well as the material things that I had from my eldest son to pass down to the new one. It was just the passing of seasons, and remembering my first pregnancy and thinking, now I would be this big, and now the baby will be this. And it's true that time, these monster thing reduces, but it never really abandons you. Oh, to the point that now I'm writing a book and it's about my miscarriages. And I didn't want it to be about my miscarriages. I wanted it to be something different. And it's turned out that I'm accepting that I need to write about this and mix it up with the other thing that I want to write. So it's going to be something strange, but
it sounds like it's going to be great. I mean, to talk about, you just talked about the Babadook a little bit. It's like, it's not going away. It will just hide in the basement.
Exactly.
You will feed it, small, and you will show it love sometimes, but it will just stay there. It would just not leave the basement if you keep your grief in check, and if you keep your acceptance in check. And that can change any moment. I mean, that's the thing with 5 stages of grief that we talked about before, Kübler-Ross and Kessler's 5 stages of grief. There's in that one bit, I think, denial. They're talking about denial, and Kübler-Ross and Kessler, they write that denial is our body's way to survive.
Yeah.
Because loss is so big. The loss is such a big thing that you need kind of like space from it. You need sometimes denial can save you.
Yes,
that's really important. That from their studies, and they say about acceptance. I think this is beautiful, and I will quote it. Acceptance is often confused with the notion of being all right or okay with what has happened. This is not the case. Most people don't ever feel okay or all right about the loss of a loved one. The stage is about accepting the reality that our loved one is physically gone, and recognizing that this new reality is the permanent reality. We will never live like this reality or make it okay, but eventually we accept it. We learn to live with it. It is the new norm with which we must learn to live. And I love it because it is so poignant, and it's so beautifully written, and it is so true as well. I mean, acceptance doesn't mean, oh, I forgot about it, I never think about it. No. Acceptance is realizing that they're gone and try to find a way to live with this truth.
And that's a healthy thing to do, I guess.
Yeah, it is.
Not trying to suppress something that is there and is not going to go away. And you make me think about, and we talked about this before as well, in last time we talked privately, you and I, that, for people with chronic illnesses, people who suffered heart attack or an ictus, or someone with Lyme disease, this is super important because these people have had to learn to live in their new bodies. They might never be the same again. They're grieving themselves because, they have to continue living, but a part of them is dead. And that's so hard as well, because they have to also communicate and transmit to their loved ones how they're feeling. So the loved ones understand and accept them too. So the whole process is really, really complicated. And if it was a horror film, it would be a ghost, and it would be a monster. And now what we have is someone who's changed and has come back from the hospital, not from the tomb. But you get that in real life. It's really important. Yeah, I think it's beautiful, that quote.
Yeah, there's this film called it's an Austrian film called Goodnight Mummy. And the mother basically comes with, we don't know what operation she had, but she's come with a face mask sort of thing. And the 2 twin boys, they're like, this is not our mother.
Mm.
And you're like, what? And she's like, what? No, I'm your mother. And it's a horror film, and it's such an interesting film because these two young boys are so adamant that this is not their mother. They try to kill her, and it is very gruesome. It is like, what the hell is going on here? Like, why are they doing this? Maybe they're trying to kind of, like, because they obviously have been separated from their mother for a period of time. Maybe they're still struggling with that loss, with that, they weren't close enough. And that's a really interesting film. And as you said about the bodies, I mean, the first stage of grieving is denial, and it helps us, survive the loss. And it is that stage where you say life makes no sense. Life makes no sense because you're in a state of shock. You are numb. You don't feel anything, and then it slowly comes to you, and you feel angry.
Yeah.
And for example, if you were, had a chronic illness, you would deny it. You would say, "Oh no, I don't have that," and you will go to a lot of doctors to prove that you don't have that. But then you would go another doctor, and you would start to feel angry. It's the second stage. You will feel angry because this is not happening to me. No, will not happen. I didn't do this. I know a lot of people with chronic illnesses. They say, "I never drank alcohol. I never smoked in my life. And why do I have this? Why God didn't prevent this?"
Yes.
Is the question that is going on in their minds. Like, why did God made me this way, or let this happen to me, or something like that?
Yeah, it could be. Sorry, no, it would have to do a lot with when you get an illness. What is the source of that as well?
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe a denial in the cases that you mentioning, if it's something like immunological, your immune system might have created that. There's nothing attacking your body. They made their reaction is that. But when you get an insect bite, for example, when you get with Lyme disease, and nobody knows what that is, and you get these diseases, and then you go to your doctor, and the doctor says it's in your head, when there's actually something physical eating you from the inside. Okay. Then it's more than denial. It's like, no, you're not understanding me. It's frustration. In those cases, we have a very frustrated being who's also ill, and the grief is at different level. I think, I don't know if there might be even different levels of grief.
Yeah, of course there are. I mean, apart from stages, there are, you cannot have the same reaction to every stage. Like, not every person. For example, for one person, anger can be more crucial, because I mean, I'm talking about Kübler-Ross and Kessler again here, but they define anger as a structure. Because after denial, you feel, when you lose somebody, you feel lost at sea. And anger is kind of like, it's your connection to something. They say, I think I find this really interesting. They're like, no connection to anything. Then you get angry at someone. Maybe a person who didn't attend the funeral, maybe a person who isn't around, maybe a person who is different now that your loved one is gone. Suddenly you have a structure. Your anger toward them gives you a structure. You feel I mean, I saw this in Hereditary so much, because Peter causes the accident that kills Charlie, and Annie blames Peter, but also secretly she blames herself, because she's the one who let them leave together. And but her anger towards Peter keeps her afloat. She doesn't drown in the sea with no connection. She just holds on to that anger, because that's the only thing that keeps her going. That's the only thing that gives her structure.
It's funny because
And then
I'm thinking of the critical thinking here, you know, the process of the questions that the person grieving makes, and it takes the person to react in a way or another. Is how interesting that is. Sorry, because I interrupted you.
No, I was like, no, definitely. I mean, then I will talk about a little bit about bargaining. Maybe people will have questions about that. The bargaining is more, it's the stage where you want the life return to what it was. It's that simple. That stage is all about that. You just, you're always thinking about if onlys in that stage. You're like, if only I had stopped that accident, if only I had realized the illness sooner, if only. Yeah, it's the stage of if only. You will do anything, to get them back. And for example, in Pet Sematary, I love that scene in the remake. Ellie is dead. She returns from the beyond, the Micmac burial grounds, and Louis baits her because she reeks of death. I mean, you can see from the screen that she's like rotten to the core. And when he brushes her hair falls out, and he's slowly realizing that this is not what I asked for. It's like what I ordered from Amazon and what I got. It's like really he realizes as a doctor, because he's a medical doctor, and he's the one who's always saying like there is no beyond, there is no afterlife, and he keeps like saying these sentences in the beginning, but then he realizes that that's not the case. And when he sees that, you know, hair, like that weird hair, he's like, oh my God, this is not my Ellie. I think that's the moment he realizes that this is something else. This is not my daughter. And then you go into the depressive stage, which is the one that makes you not get out of the bed at all. But it's not the same. I mean, it's like you withdraw from life, and you're in a like sea of sadness, you know, wondering perhaps if there's any point in living at all, like if you're going to live alone now. And I think it's a very important stage, because this is the make or break it stage. You can break it, but also you can, if you get out of this alive, you will surely find your way to acceptance, which is, you know, learning to live again, once again.
It's interesting that, because you're making me think again of my kids, for example. We've got a lot of pets at home, and we recently
us too, 3
going between cats, dogs, guinea pigs, and well, we don't have dogs, not cats, but yeah, it's like a little farm.
We have 2 dogs.
We got 2 cats. Oh, I love dogs. I love animals. But it's true, they like a member of the family. When they go, it's like you've lost a member of the family. It's just like really, like they get really to you, don't they? But we recently we have lovebirds, and one of them got caught in a wrong place in the cage, and he died, and we think it was heart attack or something he had. But obviously I have a 6-year-old and the 11-year-old, and they were both very sad, but they react to death differently. And the old one was like, you know, I got this bird out, and I thought, oh my God, what am I doing now? Because that's the question as a parent. Do you hide it? Do you show it to them? And obviously my instinct, and okay, let's make this natural. And being a Gothic and a goth, then you think, let's make this natural, because it shouldn't be a trauma. And we're having all these conversations about death and grieving, and take this naturally. I'm not going to do the opposite of what I'm preaching. So I took this bird out of the cage, and I said, do you want to hold it? Do you want to touch it? So we did a whole process, and different processes. For my eldest son was a process, for the youngest one was a different process, for my husband was a different process. So we did our little ritual. We buried it under an olive tree that we have, and we thought of
so
it.
beautiful.
We did a beautiful thing actually for this lovebird, you know, but then my eldest son just goes away and feels sad but doesn't think about it anymore. So I don't know if in the future this is going to come out in some kind of form. Babadook again.
Well,
but the youngest one, he's very verbal, and he goes, why do we have to die, mommy? If we're alive, why do we have to die?
Ooh, straight to the point.
Oh, yeah. But he was asking this since he was 5 or 4.5. Why do people die? And he was very concerned about the 80s. Mommy, are you close to dying because you are already 46? I'm like, no, no, I've got another.
I hope not.
40 years ago, please. And yeah, he was thinking all this, and he was thinking out loud. And I thought, for someone like this child that thinks like that, if I suppressed and told him not to speak his mind up, that would be so negative for him. And you know, we have an illness at home, we have things, and we try, or I try to talk about it in a really natural way, you know, as you said before, that when you realize when you were 10, everything that's living can die anytime, and it's really hard because we think we're immortal, but we are going to die. And how we cope and put up with that, and how we deal with the whole thing, I think this is the point. It has to be a healthy thing. We shouldn't remove it away. It should be part of what we are, because it is, and accept it with more naturality. And then people wouldn't get in these stressed situations, because they could just more or less, okay, accept it, make it part of the everyday life. I think, well, the memory is there. And if it makes you happy thinking of an afterlife, then think of an afterlife. And if you think that reincarnation is the answer for you, you feel happy, just go there, you know? We don't know. We don't have all the answers. So
we don't know.
We get a lot of people telling us the stories and remembering all the past lives. And I think that's fascinating. You know, I'm buying that ticket. I like that one. But it's very delicate. It's very delicate.
Delicate subject. And I have a story with lovebirds as well. And when I was little, we also had a lovebird called Kutlu as our surname. And we moved from one city to another, and we went, like my brother and I, we went with our grandmother, but our parents and the bird will come later. And when our parents came, there was no bird. And they were like, he got a little bit sick, and we left him in a veterinary in another city. And we were like, okay. And then we moved on with our lives. My mother still talks about that moment. She's like, we were like so afraid what your reaction would be. We were like talking about it, and then we told you and you didn't care at all. But maybe we did. And we couldn't voice it out. We couldn't find words, because you told us that it was alive when you left it. I mean, in our minds, it still lives. You know, it didn't die. Yeah. So maybe if you said, we took him to a doctor, but then he passed away, our reaction would have been different. So it's a very delicate subject to talk about with anyone, but especially with kids.
Yeah.
But because, you know, that you're like, should I let them know? Should I not? I like, when is the right time to talk about this? It's never the right time. It's never the right time.
Way. And they tell you, I don't want that side of the story. I prefer this one. They have the preferences, you know. My eldest one is more like, okay, you go, you die, bye, see you later. And he doesn't question if there's an afterlife. I don't know what he really thinks, because he doesn't really say it. But the youngest one is like me. There must be something. There's something else. It's still possible that we're here and then we're not. What's the point? You know, so thinking.
Yeah, I still to this day prefer the story where he lived in that veterinary and then found a new home. I still prefer that story to the one that he dies.
Yes.
And to me, there's a more happy ending, that he finds a new home.
Oh.
but about this talk about grief, helping people. I think we should talk about this more. We should talk about death more. We should talk about grief more, because when I was researching for my dissertation, I saw online that a lot of people got through their trauma while watching horror films. And this is a thing. I mean, go to, for example, go online now, write grief horror. You will find a lot of links to people telling stories about how horror films help them survive.
That's so
interesting. I found that fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that should be investigated more, and by psychologists and people who are interested in psychiatry, and a lot of people, especially. We should do, like, maybe we should collaborate with psychology departments and do these researches on people and try to understand why this is the case. I mean, Matthias Klessen, another horror scholar, he said that COVID, in the post-COVID world, horror people are more equipped to deal with the trauma of it all, because we already lived through fake scenarios where this happened, so we are most likely to survive. And I found that fascinating as well. I'm like, oh, he's right, because like, a lot of people, I have a friend who has anxiety, and everybody tells her, she's also a horror fan, everybody tells her, like, how are you watching horror films? You have anxiety. And she's like, but that's not real life. Real life scares me. Real life scares me more. And that's the perfect answer. Yes, real life scares us more. But also, horror films with their fake dangers and fake deaths kind of prepare us for the real ones.
That's right.
And that's the thing that's important, I think, concerning grief and death as well. They prepare us for grief. They prepare us for a lot of things.
I totally agree. And that makes it makes us go to the next part I've got prepared for you that you haven't seen yet. Because we have some little examples. I know I sent you lots of different things, but I've had to choose, because if not, this is going to go forever. But I don't mind. But I found some moments in series, because I know that you've been looking a lot into films, but I want to also look into series, because I'm a series fan. And I want to look at just a couple of things to see precisely, like, the examples of what we're talking about, to see how certain characters are dealing with or deal with their grief. And I found this fantastic glitch here. So
it's beautiful. I love it.
Yes.
I really need this presentation, Alice.
I'll send it to you. I will send it to you. Of course I will. Yes. And I just thought, well, let's have a look, for example, at these, that you mentioned this to me, and I thought, yes, we need to bring it, because it's also something that I've read, I've watched, and I put them together because obviously they are connected. But how it was really difficult to find the right picture for these. But I want us to talk about here how these characters are dealing with these grieving moments in these two films. I mean, we could be here for a whole hour. The idea is just to do like a few, mentioning a couple of things from a couple of things that I have.
Exactly.
And then if we feel like in another time, we could just dedicate a session to one of these and do it.
2 shows.
But let's do a little bit of what is nibbling, so people can have a bit of a taste and of how much we could actually talk about, and how this series now, because these are the things that we're watching currently while we are in the pandemic. This is the kind of help that we might be getting from these films, or this series in this case. So in the first one, we have the Haunting of Hill House. And this is a very, very dense and very strong moment, a sister burying a sister, and even more having to do the autopsy that she chose to do. For me, that was really disturbing and yet beautiful. And
Yeah.
it's connected to
And the sister owning a funeral home is by itself very telling.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to say, and I have to say that because I use this. I've been using The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I've used the book in my sessions for learning the English language. So we were looking at the descriptions and adjectives. And because they had seen the series first, they were disappointed that the book is different. So we have to say
Yes.
that, yes, they are different. You do not really see in the book anything. It's all in the description and it's all in your head. But, well, there are some things that are similar. So this is the one thing I would like to mention, that if people...
I love the book. I love Shirley Jackson. I just like Jennifer Kent, I think she's a genius. And I watched the film Shirley as well. I recommend it to everybody who loves Shirley Jackson. And I mean, in the book, The Haunting of Hill House, I love the first paragraph. I mean, it's beautiful. It's especially the part where she writes, "Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone."
Yeah.
And I think it's so beautiful, and it gives me chills. Like, it's yes, what a writer. And this book and also the show is about grief completely.
Exactly.
I mean, in the book, Eleanor is grieving for her mother, whom she looks after, and then you see the show, and the entire show is structured along the 5 stages of grief. Each episode is about one stage. You see denial, and you see anger, you see bargaining, and Nellie's episode is acceptance, at least. And the family's grief over the mother and Nellie is written in its pages. I mean, in the script, it takes all of them to go to Hill House to finally deal with their grief. And there is a very long, it's my favorite episode, where the funeral of Nellie is my favorite episode. I think it's the 6th one, the one that is like kind of like a one shot and one take. Sorry. And it's so beautiful because, like, these people are, having a very normal grief reaction. They are shouting at one another. They're blaming one another. Right. It's like a family unit. They're like, this is your fault. And they're like, yes, this is what a family is about. This is what grief is also about, trying to find meaning. I mean, if you just sit in silence, you will not find meaning. True. You will find meaning by looking into yourself, looking to people that are next to you, to kind of like make sense of like what's going on, like what's happening, why this happened to Nellie, why did she hang herself, or did she hang herself? And these are the important stories, I think, that are worth telling. And I love The Haunting of Hill House. I will watch it 100 times and still find something new.
It's good. It's just that the end, it might be a bit disappointing for some people.
Yes. It's like, oh, are they still in the room?
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's kind of strange. Yeah, I think it's a slow thing, but it's very well made, and it's got a lot of the Gothic elements. And I wasn't too sure about The Haunting of Bly Manor, but this one, I kind of really liked the end, the ghostly thing. That's why I chose this image. Is for me, it's a lot about identity, which is something we haven't talked about yet, and that the Gothic deals with very well. It's just giving this ghost is losing the identity. She's been forgotten, and then by being forgotten, she even loses physically her appearance, and the face keeps going back to the sea, to the lake. That's, for me, it's like really a claustrophobic idea of back in the water, but at the same time, you back in the water is like being back to be born, being back in the womb. So it's like the mourning here is kind of different, isn't it? Because it's so much you don't know about the different stories all together. It's like these Russian dolls, there's stories inside the stories, and also
yeah, a lot of stories.
yeah, the
And sorry, go on.
No, it's okay. No, the characters, the actors and the actresses, they're the same as in The Haunting of Hill House, but they play different roles. This is a little bit what's going on, but then once you're there, it's nice. I just love the ghostly imagery
elements in it. Yeah. I mean, there is grief in this as well. I mean, Dani is clearly grieving for her dead fiance, and she also feels guilty for causing it and enjoying life, to be honest. And the children's and the uncle's grief over the dead parents have a huge part in the story as well. But the most important one is, to me, Jamie's grief over Dani, that spans a lifetime, waiting to heal, waiting and waiting. And she tells the story, and after that, Flora says, the older Flora says that, oh, you said it wrong. I mean, you sold it wrong. This is not a ghost story. It's a love story.
That's right.
And she's like, same really. She says, just same really. Yes, same really. Because like ghost stories are so intertwined with love stories, because, you know, there's always a element of love in the, for example, the lady in the lake also has a love connection. The reason that she is this way is because of love.
That's right.
And unreturned love. And the reason that the lady in the lake changes is also because of love, because Dani chooses herself to sacrifice herself, firstly for Flora, secondly for Jamie. And I think this is so beautiful. And the scene I love the most is that you know, Dani is lying in the lake. Jamie is trying to reach her, and the narrator goes, Dani would never. And because the lady in the lake is now Dani, and Dani would never. And that just breaks my heart. I'm like, this is really this kills me. Like, why does it end this way? And when you go to the very end and you see Jamie looking at the reflections and trying to see a part of Dani, just a little glimpse, and then she falls asleep, and then you see a hand on her shoulder, and you're like, this is so Gothic. This is so Gothic. I love it. Exactly, it is very Gothic. And it's like a haunted house, and then you see ghosts, and there's love, and everything about it is like a little bit, you know, depressive, and everything about it is very Gothic, and I love it so much. Bly Manor is also one of my favorites, to be honest. I have to say this.
It's fantastic. I realized here, I don't know, probably you agree with me, that in this second one, there's so much of, it reminds me of the Japanese way, the ghostly Japanese, or the ghost Japanese culture, sorry, phrase that well. The fact that the ghost never goes away, is always there. You can't get rid of a ghost in Japanese culture. Also, the long hair, it reminded me a lot. I don't know if they had that in mind. It was just an influence that they had. I've not quite investigated it, but I thought this is kind of very Japanese.
Yeah, because, you know, Anglo-American culture is all about, you know, walking into the light, and, you know, just being, I've been saved, I'm no longer a ghost, I finished my business.
That's right.
And I love that thing that, you know, Western culture has about, you know, unfinished business. You know,
that's
only people with unfinished business will be ghosts. Other people won't. And because of that, after they finish their business, I mean, there was a show called Ghost Whisperer. I know if you have watched it.
Yeah.
But, you know, she would help them cross over to the other world by completing tasks with them. And that was such an interesting way from, you know, my culture, because we don't really believe in ghosts. in Muslim culture, we don't really believe in ghosts. We believe that people die and then they go to, they stay for a bit in their tomb. Then they go to, in the blink of an eye, they go to the apocalypse where they are judged.
All
So
right.
there's no time to be a ghost. And so that's really interesting. So it's fascinating for me to watch things like Supernatural, or the Ghost Whisperer, to have that kind of like, oh, they stay here because they have to. I mean, obviously she couldn't say goodbye to her kid. Obviously she's gonna stay and be a ghost. And that's really fascinating to me, that relationship with the ghost.
Yeah.
And of course with the Gothic as well. I mean, horror is 100%. I mean, various studies date the beginning of horror to Gothic literature. James Twitchell states that modern works of artificial horror originated in the late 18th century discovery that by including extreme feelings of dreadful pleasures, both print and illustration could arouse and exploit powerful feelings deep within the human spirit. And I think many scholars believe that the Gothic novel was born out of the Enlightenment repression, because you repress, these things don't exist, and then it will come up eventually, and it did. In the form of romanticism, in the form of the Gothic novel. And that becomes the Freudian uncanny in the Gothic, and because it's both familiar and unfamiliar. There are haunted homes, grieving families along with otherworldly spirits take center stage. And even the Victorian age is a place where mourning is very out in the open. Even Queen Victoria herself is known for her very public grief over Prince Albert's demise. And this age's obsession with morbidity, decay, death, and mourning, I think, showed in both the culture and the works of art. And I mean, even Elizabeth Bronfen, I think, calls this death by proxy. And I love this, because this is also in my field. Death by proxy means you can experience your death by, visual imagery through someone else. And horror as a genre, I think, right up to the contemporary example, works on a similar dynamic. The viewers experience things at a safe distance, fear as well as grief. And I think that's very important for horror.
It is. It's not just about fear, as you say, it's also about the grief, indeed. This takes me to the next one. This is an Australian production. I don't know if you've seen Glitch.
I've heard of it. This is the one where they die and come back, right?
Exactly. All of a sudden, one day, all these people start coming out of their graves, and they don't know what's going on. They don't even have a recollection of having died. They all come from different ages and different periods of times. And so one of them is the police's wife that we see here in the middle. And the phrase here is everything that lives must die. Right? This is the final season because we have science now. I love it because it's like the new way of getting zombies without seeing them being ridiculously stupid and wanting to eat brains. So we have that they just people are coming back and they're not in decay, which is pleasant because we don't want to see someone coming out of the grave like in Michael Jackson's Thriller.
Of course. But you're like, no, go away. Go back.
The horror side of things. But it's very cleverly made and it makes you question things. What would happen for the person that comes back to life? But what would happen to the person that is here and has moved on? And it puts the different pressure on the different characters. And it makes you, again, your critical thinking is there going on and your moral and your beliefs and what's right, what's wrong. Because obviously people who are still alive have moved on, but then the dead one is never moved on. And well, you're making me accept things that I was dead. So it's okay that you moved on, but I still have my feelings. And then there's all this science behind it, why they come back to life, and it's a whole drama. It's pretty traumatic, all of it, and some deaths, and quite horrific too at some point. So
I didn't watch it. I heard about it so much, but I haven't watched it, and I'm now itching to watch it because that sounds super interesting to me.
It is. It makes you question science. It makes you question what would you do if. It makes you question, where all these people come from. They don't grieve from when they died. So I think it's a fantastic example for you as well to see how they mourn. They don't pass grief. And if they had to die again, and they don't want to die again, they come back.
Of course.
But have to avoid.
And if it happened to me, for example, I think I would go through the 5 stages of grief as the person who came back, because I would first deny that I died at the first place. And then I would be angry at my loved one because they forget about me. And then I would bargain. And then I would be depressed probably. And I would finally accept that I died and I came back. It's a fascinating subject, I think, and it's a really one way to look at grief and death.
That's true.
It sounds beautiful.
It is good. I think if you watch this, you're gonna really find a lot of these elements, and
maybe we will do one episode on glitch.
I think it sounds like a good idea. It does have there are pockets of moments where grief and mourning, they're there in the spotlight, and they say these phrases, and the characters say these phrases, and you go, I would have said that too, because I understand how you feeling and what you're going through. So definitely something worth to watch. Something else that I've just started watching that last week is a French production, and it's called Transfers. And
Transfers
is really, really clever. Again, it's really clever.
Wow.
It's in French. I had the subtitles in English. My husband can follow in French, but I can't, apart from oui, oh la la, and a few more things. But it's really clever because, and I think you're going to like that too. We have here 2 men. I know you can see 3, but there's really 2. The one that is dead is the one on the right. But with some new medicine technique, the new advances in medicine and technology, his brain, so would it be like his soul, can be transferred to another body that has been shot. So they get both transferred. So one kind of disappears. So
there was a Hollywood movie about this, with Ryan Reynolds. I can't remember. What was the name? There was Ben Kingston, and there was Ryan Reynolds. I can't remember the name of the film, but it is the same premise. Rich people are transferred to young and healthy bodies before they die.
Something
and I was like what?
Something like that. It's pretty scary because you have, on the one hand, I chose this to talk about it with you because obviously he dies. He's swimming with his family and they're on holiday, and he dies. He has a heart attack or something in the water, and he just dies. And the next thing that you see is him waking up in this other body, and he's seen his own body dead. And all that because his wife didn't want to lose him. So again, you have here your grief, all the stages of denial. So the wife doesn't want to lose him. So she even bargains having him in a different body. And imagine there are moments where they're going to intimate and he's in this other body that has different necessities and they're not physically attracted to each other. And it even says, you don't like my smell. And it makes you think, man, if I was in that situation, that's really.
Oh my God, right. It's a very tough situation. And as you said, as we talked before, I mean, grieving yourself also comes into play in this one.
Yes.
Because he knows that he's dead. He knows he died. he passed away. This is something else. And he's also grieving himself and also trying to learn to live, accept this body that was given to him by his wife, not by his own will as well. So that's really fascinating to me. That's a really interesting show. I also noted it down.
No, it's really good as well, because you can imagine that there's some people buy these bodies. It becomes like human purchasing, buying and selling of human beings. It gets into what is the name? Like I can't remember the word now. But yes, they start dealing in gambling and betting on these bodies. And then what started as helping to people that one passed away and the other one was alive, to give him like a second chance, it becomes a business, black market, religion is there involved. I mean, it's got politics, it's got a lot. There's only one season, but I'm hoping that there is a second one, because in the second season,
fingers crossed,
in the second season, we have this other body with the other man's inside. So we were like, oh, let's see what happens next. So you are all the first thinking that one of them is dead. But you see, if you watch it, it's got a lot.
Oh my God. But it's also a kind of a world where nobody dies.
Nobody really dies. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, nobody really dies. It's an interesting thought.
But also again, identity, how your own identity can be invaded and it can be stolen from you. You know, it's like he says to his wife, who gave you the rights of choosing for me and putting me in this other body that has memories as well, and it had a past life, and he's like trying to discover who this other person was. I mean, it's fascinating. And again, you know, the Gothic tropes about identity and acceptance, and so I think it's quite clever, and it's a modern thing. And
it's a really fascinating subject, and I thought of it immediately. I thought of in Turkey, a lot of people reject organ donations, like they don't want to donate organs of loved ones. And because they say like it's against religion, that we should go as one, as God made us. And a lot of people don't, even if the person who is dying checked for organ donations, the parents can say no. We won't do that. Yeah, they have the right. And a few months ago, I sat down my mother and I said, I'm an organ donor. And if something happens to me, really, truly, I said this, if something happens to me ever, and if my organs are intact, I want you for me, because this is my will. This is my own will. And because this is my body, not yours. I mean, you may have given birth to it, but that doesn't give you the rights. And I'm like, if there ever happens something, like, you have to give my organs to people, because like what would I do with them out in the earth? I mean, maybe someone can see with my eyes, maybe someone can their hearts can beat with mine. So that's really important for me, that to talk about what right do you have over my body.
That's true.
And that's an interesting, fascinating thing, I think.
Identity again, and obviously you see a lot of horror movies and films that talk about, they do all these, and they remove the organs and they do these change. It's like a modern Frankenstein.
A modern Frankenstein.
So we have that's like this style of horror and science fiction started there, but it's it's amazing how many things you can deal with nowadays in a more modern and maybe less gory way, not to replace the slasher films or horror, because they must be there too.
Yeah, and it's also very interesting thing that Frankenstein is a Gothic novel. I mean, how beautiful, isn't it? Like this woman, this young woman, who was barely legit. I mean, she thought of this and wrote this masterpiece. To me, Frankenstein is a masterpiece. I mean, it's such a beautiful novel.
That's right.
And it's about, it's about life. It's about right to your body, right to identity, family, grief, and a lot of things,
Yeah,
it's
honestly,
about abandonment, feeling isolated and abandoned. And yeah, so beautiful. So a little bit talk of Frankenstein there.
yeah. It is. It gets reinvented in many different ways. I think Frankenstein. Yes, obviously, and religion again, because you play in God, you play to be God. So who gives you the right? The monster rebels, and it's like, who gave you the right to do this? And the same happens
To me.
all over again. So yeah, you're my creator, but the creator said, "Oh, I put my foot in it. Sorry, excuse me. I'm not a sack of potatoes. I'm a living human thing or a living thing." So yeah, I think it's something that can go and will go on for a long time as well. And finally, my favorite of all times, 15 seasons of Supernatural. Not enough. We need another season. We need this to continue. I mean, I brought this because
I heard that there was going to be a prequel and Jensen Ackles was producing it, right?
Yeah,
I heard about that.
Yes, there's a lot of things.
It's going to be about John, I think. John.
Yeah, some of the parents.
His story.
Yeah, I think it's about the parents, but we want them to come back. We want them to get, the fans. We want Jack to bring them back in the job, but this is very interesting, and I've left it to the end for obvious reasons because it's my favorite, but also because it has so much. I think if you've seen all the seasons.
I've seen up to the 9th.
Right. Or with someone spoiler, I will not say anything.
Spoil it. I don't care about those kinds of things. I don't care about spoilers.
You need to watch it for yourself. But I think what we have here is a masterpiece of grief because they die so many times, these two.
Yeah, they do.
The father dies so many times as well. Dean is constantly bargaining with death all the time.
Constantly.
It's just how many times, and every time they come back, something bad happens. Sam dies. So in the first picture, we have Sam is dead, and then he comes back, and we know how he comes back. Then the first time that he dies as well, and then it's like the dad bargains with death there, and first ones, and then at this point where they both dead and you're thinking, what the hell, this is like Romeo and Juliet thing that they come back to life again, and then they constantly grieving each other's deaths, but they come back.
They are
these you didn't do, I would have done better, and they constantly fighting. And you have the final scene that this is the one in the middle is like the final scene that you're going to be sobbing, you're going to be cursing the writers, and you're going to be like be physically ill. We have all felt this loss. We got taken, the audience, they took a part of us away with them. The actors suffered a lot with these last scenes and the last episode because they didn't want to stop there. It was super difficult to finish such a big show that people were demanding more and more. We were grieving. I'm still grieving. Some people have come back to watch it all over again. I don't want to, but I want to.
I don't want to start that cycle.
I don't want again because I watched it twice, but without the end. 15 years is a long time watching a show that gives you so many different feelings, and it talks to you in so many different ways, and it talks about death in so many different forms, and it keeps bringing elements from folklore, tradition, worldwide ideologies, and it's
Gothic.
Oh yes, and a lot of slashing, a lot of
slashing. That's true. A little bit demon slashing as well.
It's got humor as well. It's got everything, and I thought that this has got all these elements because from different angles again.
And if from the very beginning, the loss of their mother to a violent very, very violent death. I mean, to be burned alive in the ceiling. I mean, that's the one way to go, and that's the one image to never, leave your mind. That will always stay with you. And I remember saying that's a horrible way to die, and that's you would never forget that if you saw someone dying that way. And that will stay with you. And there is that grief over their mother, and there is the grief over the absent father, and there is the grief over their very fragile relationship in the beginning. And then they start. My favorite episode is Mystery Spot. I love it. I love the Groundhog Day concept. It's beautiful. I mean, it's like Happy Death Day. Dean is dying over and over, and it's like it's so fun. It's so fun, super fun. That's the reason it's my favorite. But it's also super sad because Sam is grieving over and over again over the death of Dean. In sometimes, I don't know if I can call it, but hilarious ways. Sometimes he dies, it's like
a piano falls on his
head. A piano falls, and you're like, oh, come on now. And it's like you're laughing and you're like feeling sad. It's a really interesting episode for me. It's like the grief coming over and over and over and over. It's never leaving. And Sam trying to find a way over his grief, and trying to find the why the mystery spot is the way that it is. And finally he figures it out, thankfully, and they go back to normal. And so, as you said, and till the 9th season, I saw a lot of deaths, and I think what was the name of the guy who helps them? It's like
Castiel, the angel, or Bobby?
No, Bobby dies. Yes, Bobby dies, and I was like, oh no, I can't handle this. Like, he's like a father to them. They can't grieve this also. I mean, come on. And I felt really sad about that. And this show really is something. I mean, it has a lot of like elements, as you said, like myths and folklore, and you see Gothic, you see the Lady in White, which is basically like La Llorona, and a lot of like similarities from a lot of cultures you see in the show. And it is also very fun. It makes fun of itself. Yes. There is no show that writes itself into the script. That their actors, they're shooting supernatural in the supernatural, and it's like really fun. They go to a fan kind of like convention, and it's like so hilarious. Yes. But it's also so sad. In many moments, I found myself like having a tear down by the cheek, and it's like, why am I feeling this way? This is just a show. It gets to you.
It gets you because precisely of all those moments where you can see this humor. So when there's humor, I think that when you get something really serious, it really hits you, because that's really sad. And I mean, the final episode, it's just like at home, we were all crying. I mean, people have recorded them, even the actors recorded themselves watching
crying.
And Castiel, Misha Collins, he was with his kids, holding on his kids and crying his eyes out, because it's just like really well made. But also, I think because of the acting as well, but it's also the human touch. These actors, they've felt their characters. And I think at some point they have even said that in interviews, that a part of them is gone with the show, because they were Dean, they were Sam, they were Castiel, they were Bobby, they were all these characters, and they've had to say goodbye. And we felt that, the audience feels that. You get to a point where you're thinking, it's not just Sam and Dean, it's Jensen and it's Jared, and they both there. and whoa, this is powerful. And then it's just, you can't help it. My 11-year-old that is a little bit hard on the tear, it was like, oh, mom, but we were all calling it. It was a show. It was a show, and we were mourning. I told to my sister, she also followed this, and she's also a fan, and she was like, I felt like if I had lost my best friends, and it's just like I'm mourning them, just leave me alone. And we couldn't.
Exactly.
We wanted to talk about it, and it was healthy to talk about it because of it, with my sister, the relationship, she's got an illness, and then we watched these kind of together for over all these years, and we kept talking about them. And it was like me and her at some point, the discussions that these two brothers have. My sister and I, we've had similar discussions in our own level, but we question each other. And you are stubborn, but you're always the hypersensitive. Come on, and the everyday conversations in a horror show are everyday conversations, and that's what people learn from, I think. And that's what we need to make note of and say, okay, the fiction scenario, the fiction setting is also helpful to get over my own fears, my fear of death. True. My fear of even fear of mourning, of feeling sad. I don't want to feel sad, but it's important that I feel sad. It's part of who we are. And I think it's necessary to have horror, it's necessary to have Gothic, and it's necessary to have these things that some people kind of feel uncomfortable with, precisely because that's
I think it's kind of like this old-timey in olden times, but still actually it's been done, obituaries. Yes. They were kind of like written monuments to the death. They were believed to relieve survivors, expel death's horror and aid the survivors through their anger and grief. And I think horror films about grief have that same or TV shows have that same function. They make death familiar. They are cinematic memento mori, and their horror films are always about death and the afterlife. And what is explored, they explore it, and what is explored is no longer unknown. And we have to make death a little bit more unknown, I believe. And the director of the Babadook, Jennifer Kent, talks about her own grief in an interview. And says that the importance of stories like this to help one through the experience. And I believe her, that because you don't have to live every experience in this life. Sometimes you look at narratives, you look at stories, and you're like, oh, some people live through this. I mean, and I think I always say this, and I think it's so true. Horror characters may not all survive, but they seem to help viewers do. They seem to help us survive. And I think it's really interesting in the case of Supernatural, and also a lot of other TV shows. I mean, one of my favorite TV shows is 6 Feet Under. It's literally, it takes place in a funeral home. Yeah. And every episode is about one death. And I think the series finale is the most beautiful and most poignant, most elegant finales I've ever seen. It's the best. I mean, for me, it's the best. And to this day, I mean, it's been years, I'm mourning that show. I'm like, I wish there was a way, but it ended on such a high note that it can never, ever be again. So I'm kind of like mourning that. I'm accepting that loss now. I've come to the stage of acceptance. Yeah. And I'm just, sometimes I watch the season, just the finale, and I'm like, what a beautiful finale. I mean, come on. You can't write a better one. Definitely, especially about death.
Yeah, it's difficult. It is difficult to do, but it's great. No, there's so many examples, and we've been now talking for 2 hours.
Woo! Wow!
Yeah.
Kudos to us. Cheers.
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, there's a lot to say, and there's a lot that we can still be analyzing, and maybe we could decide next time where to go in depth with, because there's a
Good.
lot of things we could be analyzing, or shows, or there's a lot there. Well, I just wanted to share just one
And
more.
I will watch Glitch and Transfers.
Yes, we both have homework, because there's a lot of things I haven't watched that you mentioned, and I need to
Yeah.
also watch those things because they're great. Oh, let's see if that presentation is happening. So yeah, I put these
Yes.
for people to contact you, support you. I don't know if you want me to add something else, or you want to mention something there now as well, because you are on.
No, I mean, I'm on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm sharing a lot of stuff there. So there's no need, I think, at this point. I'm sharing links to other talks, and sometimes to seminars or conferences that I take part in. So if you follow me there, you can find what I do.
That's great. No, and I'll be for my followers what I do after I've interviewed people. Then I always write articles. So, and then I keep talking about you guys. Everybody I invite, I keep mentioning you in my articles and everything, because you influence me as well, and then people have these references too. So don't you worry, you'll be mentioned more than once because I love what you investigating and your research, and it's really close to how I feel as well. So this is, again, for those who want to learn more about critical thinking and how to overcome your communication fears through the Gothic lens. I put a spelling mistake. I just realized I did that quickly, so I'll have to change the truth. I always put a T at the end. So this is a free PDF. We have a spelling mistake, I promise. And yes, this is a 3-part, it's very simple, 3-part PDF where I go in depth for people to start taking action on what is critical thinking, the first 6 questions of critical thinking, how important it is to overcome your communication fears. We all fear speaking in public, and we are doing many presentations, and people write stories and they write books, and how we communicate is very important. And the Gothic lens is one of it's my favorite thing ever, as well as chocolate. So
powerful duo, definitely.
This is all me anyway, but I'll put all the links later on the video. And I have to say that I've loved talking to you, Tugce. I got the English thing now, Tugce. I'm really happy with this. It was so enlightening. There's a lot of things I wrote down that we didn't talk about. Maybe I didn't ask you, but you commented on a lot of extra things that you brought in the conversation. I've learned a lot of things. I hope that people watching this video feel the same way, because very, very educative, and I'm really happy. So, well, thanks a lot, and I hope to see you again.
Thank you for having me. Yeah. It's always nice to talk to you, and it was I think it was amazing to hear your ideas as well, and see those shows that I have yet to see, and that I will check out. I'll check them out because they interested me. And so thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I hope that everyone enjoys this.
I'm sure they will, and I'm sure that they'll let us know. And I'll give you the contact. So if anybody wants to talk to you as well directly, I will give them your details. So I will pause this recording. Don't go. We'll wrap up after the woman saying the recording has stopped, and then
okay.
I hope to see you again in another interview. See you soon.
I will do that. If there is ever a chance to talk about something else, I would very much like it.
Very good. Thank you. See you soon. Bye.
See you.